Imagine you finally get everything you've ever wanted: the money, the status, the recognition, and yet you wake up feeling emptier than ever. You look around at your achievements and wonder why none of it feels like enough. This isn't a modern problem. This is the oldest human trap, and Leo Tolstoy saw it destroying people over a century ago. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why your ambition for wealth is the very thing stealing your happiness, and how Tolstoy's radical insights can free you from this cycle before it consumes your entire life. Let's start with something Tolstoy understood better than almost anyone: the insatiable nature of material desire. In his masterpiece, Anna Karenina, Tolstoy doesn't just tell us a story about adultery and social scandal. He reveals something far more unsettling about human nature. He shows us characters who have everything society tells them they should want: wealth, position, beauty, yet they're tormented by restlessness and a dissatisfaction. Tolstoy observed that the more we acquire, the more we realize acquisition itself can never satisfy the deeper hunger inside us. Think about your own life for a moment. Remember the last time you achieved a financial goal or bought something you'd been wanting for months. How long did that satisfaction last? A week? A day? An hour? Tolstoy would tell you this isn't weakness or ingratitude. It's the fundamental nature of trying to fill a spiritual void with material things. Here's where it gets really interesting and uncomfortable. Tolstoy believed that ambition for wealth doesn't just fail to make us happy, it actively manufactures unhappiness. Why? Because it trains us to live in a perpetual state of incompleteness. When you're chasing wealth, you're essentially telling yourself every single day that you're not enough as you are, that your life isn't valuable until you reach that next milestone. This creates what Tolstoy saw as a psychological prison. You become incapable of experiencing contentment because contentment would mean stopping the chase, and you've built your entire identity around the chase itself. The ambitious person wakes up thinking about what they don't have, spends their day working for what they don't have, and goes to sleep anxious about not having enough. Tolstoy watched the wealthy aristocrats of his time, people who had more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, and saw them just as miserable as the peasants, sometimes more so, because they had run out of external excuses for their inner emptiness. Now, let's talk about what Tolstoy called the Great Deception. In his spiritual and philosophical writings, particularly after his own moral crisis in his 50s, Tolstoy became obsessed with understanding why educated, successful, wealthy people were so prone to despair and even suicide. What he discovered was that society had created an elaborate lie. The lie goes something like this: accumulate enough wealth and you'll buy your way into happiness, security, and meaning. But Tolstoy realized this was backwards. Wealth doesn't create meaning. It obscures our need to find real meaning. It's like putting a beautiful frame around an empty canvas and pretending you've created art. The frame might be ornate and expensive, but it doesn't change the fact that there's nothing of substance inside it. Here's something that might make you uncomfortable. If you're watching this video hoping I'll tell you how to get rich and be happy, you're looking for a compromise that Tolstoy believed doesn't exist. He wasn't suggesting you can have wealth and happiness if you just maintain the right attitude or practice gratitude. He was saying something much more radical, that the very pursuit of wealth as a primary aim corrupts your ability to access genuine happiness. Why? Because happiness, according to Tolstoy, comes from living in alignment with truth, with moral goodness, with connection to others and to something larger than yourself. Wealth accumulation requires you to prioritize your individual gain, to view others as competitors or means to an end, to spend your precious life energy on acquiring things that have no intrinsic value. If you're serious about understanding this, subscribe to the channel because we're going much deeper into these uncomfortable truths. Let me give you a concrete example from Tolstoy's own life. At the height of his fame and wealth, owning a massive estate, with his books selling internationally, married with a large family, Tolstoy fell into a profound depression. He had everything the world said would make him happy. He was one of the most celebrated authors alive. He had financial security beyond measure. He had a family, yet he seriously contemplated suicide. He hid ropes from himself because he was afraid he'd hang himself. He stopped going hunting because he didn't trust himself with a gun. This was a man who had won the game everyone told him to play, and he discovered the prize was worthless. What saved Tolstoy wasn't achieving more. It was a complete reorientation of his values. He realized that he'd been climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall his entire life. In his later work, particularly in his philosophical and spiritual writings, Tolstoy laid out what he saw as the fundamental error. We confuse means with ends. Money is a means. It's a tool, a medium of exchange. Yet we treat it as an end in itself, as the goal. Tolstoy wrote that this confusion is like a traveler who becomes so obsessed with the quality of his carriage that he forgets where he's trying to go. The carriage becomes the journey's purpose. You see this everywhere today. People sacrifice their health to build wealth, then spend their wealth trying to recover their health. They sacrifice relationships for career advancement, then feel lonely and isolated despite their success. They postpone living fully until they reach some financial threshold, and then the threshold keeps moving further away. Tolstoy saw this pattern destroying people, and it's only gotten worse in our age of social media comparison and consumer culture. But here's what makes Tolstoy's critique so powerful and so difficult to dismiss. He wasn't a poor man resenting the rich. He was speaking from inside the experience of wealth. He knew exactly what money could and couldn't do. He had lived both the ambitious pursuit and the achievement of wealth, and he could testify from direct experience that the promise was empty. When a poor person says money can't buy happiness, the ambitious person dismisses it as sour grapes. When Tolstoy says it, having lived as a wealthy aristocrat, you can't use that excuse. He paid the price of admission to wealth and came back with a warning that almost no one wants to hear. Now, let's address the obvious objection. Don't you need money to survive? Of course you do. Tolstoy wasn't advocating for starvation or homelessness. The distinction he made was between sufficiency and excess, between meeting genuine needs and feeding insatiable wants. In his story, How Much Land Does a Man Need?, Tolstoy tells us about a peasant named Pahom who becomes obsessed with acquiring more and more land. He's given an opportunity to have all the land he can walk around in a single day. But there's a catch. He must return to his starting point by sunset, or he loses everything. Pahom walks faster and faster, covering more ground, driven by greed to encompass as much as possible. As the sun sets, he runs desperately back to the starting point, reaches it just in time, and drops dead from the exertion. The story ends with a simple line: 6 feet from his head to his heels was all he needed. This is Tolstoy's answer to how much is enough. Enough is enough, and anything beyond enough comes at a cost to your life, your health, your relationships, your peace of mind. Think about what you are actually trading for your ambition. Every hour you spend pursuing wealth is an hour you're not spending on something else. Tolstoy believed we delude ourselves about this trade. We tell ourselves we're building wealth for our families, but we're absent from our children's lives. We tell ourselves we're securing the future, but we're not living in the present. We tell ourselves we'll enjoy life once we reach our goals, but we're training ourselves in the habit of dissatisfaction. And habits don't disappear just because circumstances change. The person who lives in constant striving doesn't suddenly become content when they achieve external success. They just find new things to strive for, new inadequacies to worry about, new comparisons to lose in. Tolstoy also understood something about wealth that we desperately try to ignore: its connection to exploitation and inequality. He looked at his own wealth and had to confront an uncomfortable truth. His comfortable life was built on the labor of peasants who lived in poverty. He couldn't enjoy his wealth without recognizing that it came at someone else's expense. This created a moral crisis for him. How could he claim to be a good person while living off the suffering of others? Now you might think this doesn't apply to you, that you earn your money fairly in a modern economy. But Tolstoy would ask you to look deeper. Where do your products come from? Who made them? Under what conditions? What is the environmental cost of your consumption? What would the world look like if everyone consumed at your level? These questions haunted Tolstoy, and they should haunt anyone seriously pursuing wealth. Here's something else Tolstoy understood that cuts right to the heart of modern life. The wealthy person is not more free, but less free. This seems contradictory. Doesn't money buy freedom? Tolstoy would say no. It creates new forms of bondage. The more you have, the more you have to protect, manage, worry about. The more you have, the more you have to lose. And fear of loss is a prison. The wealthy person needs security systems, insurance, legal protection, financial advisors, accountants. They worry about market fluctuations, investment returns, tax implications. Their possessions possess them. Tolstoy experimented with this in his own life. He tried to give away his wealth, to live more simply. And while his family resisted, and it created enormous conflict, he discovered that with less he felt lighter, freer, more authentically himself. The peasants he knew who had little were in some ways less burdened than the aristocrats who had everything. Let me share something from War and Peace that illuminates this perfectly. Pierre Besukhov, one of the central characters, inherits an enormous fortune and finds himself more lost and confused than ever. Everyone wants something from him. Women pursue him for his money. People befriend him for his connections. Advisors manage his affairs while possibly cheating him. He has no idea what to do with his life because he has too many options and no real purpose. Later in the novel, when Pierre is captured and made a prisoner of war, stripped of everything, facing death, he experiences a profound peace and clarity he never had as a wealthy man. It's only when everything is taken from him that he discovers what actually matters. Tolstoy is showing us that wealth doesn't reveal who we are. It obscures it. It surrounds us with so many possibilities and distractions that we never have to confront the essential questions of our existence. So what's the alternative? Tolstoy's answer evolved throughout his life, but the core remained consistent. He believed in what he called simplification, not poverty for its own sake, but the deliberate choice to live with less so you could be more. He came to believe that meaningful work that directly helps others or creates something genuinely useful, is essential to happiness. Not work that generates profit or status, but work that connects you to the direct impact of your labor. He believed in living close to nature, in physical work, in community, in moral and spiritual development. These things cost little or nothing in monetary terms, but they're precisely what ambitious wealth-seeking crowds out of our lives. If you're still with me, you're probably feeling some resistance to all of this, and that's natural. We've been conditioned our entire lives to see wealth accumulation as not just acceptable, but admirable, as the measure of success itself. Tolstoy is asking you to question the deepest assumptions of your culture. But here's what you need to understand. This resistance you're feeling, this voice saying, "But I need to be practical," or "But I have responsibilities," or "But this is just how the world works," that voice is not necessarily wisdom or realism. It might be fear, fear of being different, fear of being seen as a failure by others, fear of discovering that you've been investing your life in something hollow. Tolstoy would tell you that the unhappiness you feel, assuming you feel it, and most ambitious people do even if they don't admit it, that unhappiness is not a bug in the system. It's a feature. It's information. It's your deeper self trying to tell you that you're pointed in the wrong direction. The anxiety, the restlessness, the sense that something is missing. These aren't problems to be solved with more achievement. They're symptoms of a fundamental misalignment between how you're living and what would actually fulfill you. But we're trained to interpret these feelings as motivation, as drive, as the healthy desire to improve ourselves. Tolstoy would say that's backwards. They're your soul's protest against being used as an instrument for wealth accumulation. Let's talk about death for a moment, because Tolstoy certainly did. His short work, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, is one of the most psychologically penetrating stories ever written about mortality. Ivan Ilyich is a successful judge. He's climbed the social ladder. He has money and status and everything that should signify a life well lived. Then he gets sick and begins to die. And in his dying, he's forced to confront a terrifying question. Has he lived rightly? Has his life had any real meaning? And his honest answer is no. He realizes he's spent his entire life doing what was expected, what would advance him, what would impress others, and in doing so, he's completely missed the point of being alive. Tolstoy describes his anguish at recognizing that it's too late to live differently. The story is devastating because it's universal. How many people reach the end of their lives and realize they spent it chasing things that don't matter? Death has a way of clarifying what's real. And from the perspective of your deathbed, how much you accumulated will seem absurd compared to how much you loved, how much you grew, how much you truly lived. Here's a question Tolstoy would want you to ask yourself. What would you need to believe about yourself and your life if you stopped pursuing wealth? Because that's really what's at stake for many people. Ambition for wealth is inseparable from their identity and self-worth. If you're not striving, not achieving, not accumulating, then who are you? This is the existential threat that keeps people locked in the cycle. Tolstoy discovered that you have to build a different foundation for your identity, one based on your character, your relationships, your contribution to others, your internal development. But this requires enormous courage because it means stepping off the well-worn path that everyone else is on. In his later years, Tolstoy tried to live according to his principles, and it caused tremendous conflict in his life. His wife thought he was destroying their family's security. His peers thought he'd lost his mind. The church excommunicated him for his unorthodox beliefs. He was trying to live in one way, while the entire world around him was organized according to different values. This is the practical challenge. Even if you agree with Tolstoy intellectually, how do you actually live this way in a society structured around wealth accumulation? Tolstoy didn't have a perfect answer, and his own attempts were fraught with contradiction and compromise. But he would say that the difficulty of living according to truth doesn't make that truth any less true. It just makes it harder. Let me be very direct about something. If you've made it this far in this video, part of you knows I'm describing something real. Part of you has felt the emptiness of achievement, the hollowness of material success, the sense that you're running on a treadmill that goes nowhere. You might be successful by conventional standards, or you might still be striving towards success. But either way, there's a nagging feeling that something essential is missing. Tolstoy would tell you to honor that feeling, to investigate it, to take it seriously, rather than drowning it out with more ambition, more distraction, more consumption. That feeling is not your enemy. It's your guide back to authenticity. And if you want to explore these ideas further, subscribe to the channel, because we're going to keep pulling on these threads that most people are afraid to touch. So, what does happiness actually look like according to Tolstoy? It's not excitement or pleasure or the thrill of achievement. Those are all temporary and dependent on external circumstances. Real happiness, what Tolstoy called blessedness, comes from living in accordance with your highest understanding of what is good and right. It comes from moral clarity, from knowing that your life is aligned with truth. It comes from simple things, from meaningful work, from genuine connection with others, from the natural world, from the development of your inner life. It comes from being of service, from making a direct positive difference in the lives of real people you can see and touch. It comes from the peace of having enough, rather than the anxiety of always wanting more. It comes from gratitude for what is, rather than resentment for what isn't. These things sound simple, almost banal, until you realize how radical they are in practice, how much they require you to swim against the current of everything your culture tells you to value. Tolstoy also believed that part of happiness comes from intellectual and spiritual growth, from wrestling with the big questions of existence, from reading deeply, from thinking seriously about how to live. This is why he wrote so much toward the end of his life that wasn't fiction, but moral and spiritual philosophy. He believed people were starving for this kind of nourishment while being fed an endless diet of entertainment and material distraction. He wanted to wake people up to the fact that they were living in a kind of trance, sleepwalking through existence according to scripts written by a sick society. Here's another angle on this that Tolstoy explored. The pursuit of wealth isolates us from genuine human connection. When you're ambitious for wealth, other people become instruments, means to your ends. Your relationships become transactional. What can this person do for me? How can they advance my interests? You network, you make connections, you cultivate relationships with people who can help you. But are these real friendships? Is this love? Tolstoy believed that real connection requires vulnerability, mutual respect, seeing others as ends in themselves rather than means to your ends. But the ambitious mindset makes this nearly impossible. You're always performing, always calculating, always positioning yourself. You can't truly be yourself because yourself isn't optimized for success. Your authentic self might be awkward or uncertain or imperfect in ways that don't serve your ambitions. Think about the people you actually feel closest to, the relationships that feel most real. Are they the ones that advance your career or boost your status? Probably not. They're probably the ones where you can let your guard down, where you're accepted as you are, where there's no agenda beyond mutual care and respect. Tolstoy would tell you that building a life around wealth accumulation systematically destroys your capacity for these relationships, or at least severely limits them. You end up successful and alone, surrounded by people, but connected to no one, because every relationship has been contaminated by the transactional mindset that ambition requires. Let's talk about what Tolstoy saw as the spiritual dimension of this problem. He came to believe that humans have a spiritual nature that's starved by materialism. This doesn't necessarily mean religious in a conventional sense, though Tolstoy did have his own unorthodox religious beliefs. It means that we need to feel part of something larger than ourselves, to sense that our lives have significance beyond our individual existence, to experience connection with what he called the infinite. The pursuit of wealth shrinks your world down to your own desires, your own status, your own accumulation. It cuts you off from this larger dimension of existence. Tolstoy believed this spiritual starvation was the root cause of the despair he saw in wealthy, successful people. They had won the material game, but lost touch with their own souls. You might wonder, if Tolstoy is right about all this, why doesn't everyone see it? Why is the entire world still organized around wealth accumulation? Tolstoy would say that illusion is powerful, especially when it's collectively maintained. We're born into a world where everyone around us is playing the money game, so it seems like reality itself, rather than one possible choice among many. We're educated in schools that prepare us for careers that will make money. We're surrounded by advertising that tells us happiness comes from purchasing things. We're praised for ambition and judged for contentment. Our heroes are wealthy people. Our entertainment glorifies material success. The illusion is so complete that seeing through it requires an almost impossible effort of imagination and courage. It requires you to question everything you've been taught, to step outside the consensus reality of your culture, to be willing to look crazy to everyone around you. Most people aren't willing to pay that price, so they stay in the illusion, and they suffer, but they suffer in socially acceptable ways. Here's something Tolstoy would want you to understand about time. The ambitious person is always living in the future, in what they will have, what they will become, what they will achieve. But life only exists in the present moment. Every moment you spend focused on future accumulation is a moment of life you're not actually living. You're treating your present life as a kind of currency to be traded for a better future. But the future never comes. There's only ever now, and you're missing it. Tolstoy came to believe that the ability to be fully present, to experience the moment you're actually in without the interference of grasping and ambition, this is a form of wealth that money can't buy, but it requires letting go of the constant forward lean of ambition, and that feels dangerous because it means accepting yourself and your life as they are right now. Let me share one more insight from Tolstoy's work that brings this all together. In Anna Karenina, there's a character named Konstantin Levin who struggles throughout the novel with questions of meaning and purpose. He's an intellectual. He's read all the philosophy. He analyzes everything. At one point, he's working in the fields with peasants, doing hard physical labor, and he experiences a moment of perfect contentment and clarity. He's not thinking about the future. He's not worried about status or wealth. He's simply absorbed in the work itself, in the rhythm of the scythe, in the companionship of the men working alongside him, in the physical tiredness and satisfaction of the labor. In that moment, he understands something that all his intellectual searching couldn't teach him. That happiness comes from losing yourself in meaningful activity, from being fully engaged with the present, from simple things done with full attention. This experience doesn't make him rich or famous or successful by conventional measures, but it gives him something far more valuable, a direct experience of what it feels like to be truly alive. So here's where we are. Tolstoy spent his life exploring these questions from every angle, through his fiction, through his philosophy, through his own painful attempts to live according to his understanding. His conclusion was unequivocal. The pursuit of wealth as a primary aim in life is a trap that will rob you of the very happiness you're seeking. It will fill your life with anxiety, comparison, dissatisfaction, and emptiness. It will corrupt your relationships and cut you off from genuine connection. It will trap you in a constant state of becoming and prevent you from ever simply being. It will cause you to miss the life you're actually living while you chase a fantasy of a better life that will always remain just out of reach. And at the end, it will leave you with the devastating realization that you spent your precious existence accumulating things that have no real value while neglecting everything that does. The question is, what are you going to do with this understanding? Because knowing it intellectually changes nothing. Tolstoy learned this himself. He could see the truth clearly, but still struggled to live it fully. The forces pulling you toward conventional ambition are immense. They come from outside in the form of social pressure and inside in the form of ego and fear. Breaking free requires more than just understanding. It requires action, experimentation, the courage to live differently, the willingness to be misunderstood, the strength to define success for yourself rather than accepting the definition given to you. It requires what Tolstoy called a conversion of the heart, a fundamental reorientation of your values and priorities. But here's what Tolstoy would also tell you: the peace and authenticity and genuine happiness that come from living according to your deepest truth are worth any price you have to pay. The relief of stepping off the treadmill, of saying enough is enough, of choosing presence over future grasping, of investing in what actually matters. This is a liberation that no amount of money can buy, and every moment you delay this liberation is a moment of your life you're sacrificing to an illusion. The time to begin is now, not someday when you've achieved your goals, because that someday is a mirage that will always recede as you approach it. Now is all you have, this moment right here, and the question is whether you'll spend it in service to ambition or in service to life itself. Tolstoy's message is uncomfortable because it demands that we look at our lives with brutal honesty and admit that we might be investing everything in a game that can't be won, or rather, that winning it means losing something more important. But discomfort in the service of truth is far better than comfortable delusion. The unhappiness you feel is information. Listen to it, honor it, let it guide you towards something real. Your ambition for wealth is not your friend. It's the obstacle standing between you and the life you could be living, the person you could be. This is what Tolstoy learned at great cost, and this is what he's trying to tell you across the years. Stop chasing shadows and start living truth.